I have been waiting for this guest because she specializes in DBT and CBT. And we have been told that for our families in very high conflict situations, here she is, that DBT, a therapist. So hopefully we'll get Marissa on here. I was lucky enough to meet her in real life. And of course, I scooped her up to say, I need to interview you so I can see you, Marissa. That's great.
Awesome.
Before we even start, like DBT, dialectical behavioral or behavior therapy, is something a lot of people don't really understand. And in my mind, without knowing anything about it, I'm associating it with like, oh, she works with people with personality disorders. So we often think if someone has a personality disorder, they're just doomed. Is that true?
You know, it's so interesting because I hear that all the time. And I think that there's this really common narrative, especially in terms of the like, oh, this is like an intractable problem, like they're doomed narrative. And in my clinical experience, that's not really the case. I think it could be kind of an unfair and unhelpful narrative that just adds to the stigma and shame and sense of hopelessness that some of these individuals already feel. But yes, DBT was originally started for borderline personality disorder by Marsha Linehan. So I think there's that really strong association, but it is, I think, has such powerful applications for so many individuals and so many different presentations.
Yeah. All right. Well, I can't wait to dive in. But before we do, can you officially introduce yourself?
Sure. Marisa De Sa. I'm a psychotherapist. I work with children, adults, adolescents. I have over 12 years experience. I've worked in hospital settings, community mental health settings, schools, and I'm currently in private practice in Greenwich, Connecticut, where I work with families and individuals, and I specialize in cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy.
Yeah. So first of all, before we even get into the different types of therapy, what is a personality disorder?
So, personality disorder is this mental health condition usually characterized by, these long-standing patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving that tend to be pretty fixed and inflexible, and usually cause a fair amount of distress and impairment in various aspects of life, interpersonally and otherwise. They usually emerge in adolescence or early adulthood, and inherent in these disorders are sometimes this distorted view of the self or others.
Mm-hmm. Are certain people more prone to it? Like we always talk about, is this something you're born with, or is this something that you learn? And I know that's a big question.
Yeah, and I think it's one of these like multifactorial things. We look at how some of these patterns develop over time in terms of, certain adverse childhood experiences, certain emotional needs that we had that maybe weren't met, and how these personality traits can start to emerge. So it's hard to say, but I have seen a lot of evidence that there's a strong environmental component. Early interpersonal relationships and attachments.
Yeah. So you mentioned borderline. What are some other, let's say, personality disorders? I always think of narcissism.
Yeah. So there's narcissistic personality disorder. There's obsessive compulsive personality disorder. There are more dependent personality disorder, avoidant. There's different clusters, and there's often a lot of overlap too.
Mm-hmm. All right. So what exactly, actually, before we get into again what it is,
Yeah.
how would somebody land in your office? Because I feel like with the clientele and the community that we work with, many of whom have been married or involved in an intimate partner relationship with someone with a personality disorder, they think that they're not doing anything wrong.
Yeah.
And they're not the problem. So how would somebody with an issue like that end up in your office?
So a number of ways. I mean, sometimes it's the partner, that reaches out and they're desperate for a skill set or tools to help navigate their relationship with this person who, has these personality traits. It is, it's not uncommon for someone who is suffering from a personality disorder to kind of notice like these functional impairments in their life, and then eventually be like, it's something's got to give,
Mm-hmm.
and reach out for help. Um, it could be either, sometimes people in their lives are kind of at their wits' end, and give an ultimatum or say like, need to seek help.
Mm-hmm. Again, I think about like an addict where you can force them to
Yeah.
start treatment, but if they don't want to, then it's not really going to be helpful. Is that similar, or do you find like you have some
Yes.
magic to spin?
What I love about DBT is kind of baked into the treatment approach is this, motivation and commitment part where, you need the buy-in, right? And I
Mhm.
think DBT does this great job of presenting this as like, we look at the dialectic of, freedom to choose. Like, you have the freedom to choose whether you
Mm.
buy into this and engage in this, but there's also, there's an absence of alternatives. So,
Mhm.
there are these commitment building strategies baked into DBT, like devil's advocate, and, all these other like subtle strategies for enhancing commitment to treatment when there is some ambivalence. Because if you don't have the buy-in, we know that it's really not going to be that
Yeah, I
effective.
mean, the dynamic that we see a lot is that people like this don't want to be controlled.
Yeah. Yeah.
They
So
don't want
there's,
other people to dictate how they should live their lives.
yes. So there's that component. And I think, there are other treatment approaches that do a great job of, looking at some of that resistance and working with the resistance rather than pushing against it.
Hmm. I
Some of
think of
these like,
like yin yang.
yeah, some of these more like like the paradoxical interventions where you're kind of saying like, what, it makes sense that wouldn't want to change. Like these patterns that you've developed, they serve a lot of functions for you. They kind of keep you safe and protected, and hear all the wonderful things they say about you and do for you. Maybe we don't.
Hmm.
And that usually paradoxically kind of moves someone a little further to being like, what? Like, no, I think I need to work on this.
That is so interesting. All right, so finally, tell us what it is. Like, what is DBT? Tell us a little more in depth about that, and then
Mhm.
CBT too.
Yeah. So DBT is a highly structured evidence-based treatment modality. Um, and I think what's so cool are there are two main modes that are used. And one mode is individual therapy, where the client is working with their individual therapist, applying the DBT skills to real life challenges. And
Mhm.
then simultaneously, they are in a skills group, and that's more didactic in nature. So it's like kind of classroom learning setup where you move through these four main skill modules, which are mindfulness, interpersonal effectiveness, distress tolerance, and emotion regulation. And mindfulness shows up a lot because it's such a core feature.
Mhm.
And, by imparting those skills and tools in the group setting, and then the individual therapist can help them generalize to real life situations. Um, Something really cool about DBT2 is that it utilizes the idea of dialectics, which is kind of adopting this view of the world where there is no absolute truth. When
Mhm.
that two seemingly opposite ideas can both be true at the same time, like moving away from that either or thinking towards both end, and when you're kind of caught between these opposing ideas, like how do we move instead of getting polarized, how do we kind of move towards a synthesis, and then maybe a new truth will emerge.
Mhm.
And I think a really cool feature is the dialectic between acceptance and change, which
Mhm.
GBT really looks at. Like, what are our controllables? What are the things we can't control? And how do we practice like more of the acceptance skills? DBT uses the term radical acceptance.
Uh-huh.
Um, and when we want to be on the more change side of the dialectic, how do we use more of our problem solving skills? And we can like kind of plug in other skills when when more change is needed. And we're always kind of looking at that that delicate dance between acceptance and change.
I like that how there's the individual as well as the group. I always assumed it was just individual therapy.
Yeah, I love it because the way of disseminating this information and these skills and tools, if it were done in individual therapy, it would like take so long. So it's so great that they get to, use their skills group for learning the skills, and then kind of get to utilize them with their individual therapist, and their therapist helps them, plug them into real life scenarios.
So is there a timeline? Like I know you said it would take so long, but is there a
Yeah.
range?
So yeah, a skills group can be like 9 months, 6 to 9 months. And
Wow.
then, yeah,
Yeah.
it's a commitment. It's a huge time commitment, which I think is why with DBT, there's so much of like the, when you're in the pre-treatment phase of that commitment building and kind of orienting the person to like, here's what it would look like. It's a heavy lift, but here's what might be like, here's the relief that may be waiting for you on the other side.
This is completely different from what I would have imagined.
Yeah.
But what are, like, let's say, some visible indicators of success? Like, I don't know if you have any stories that you can share, but how does someone know that this person has actually made progress and
So
that
I
it's been
think
effective?
that there are so many, I love that question because I think there's so many ways progress can show up. And I think some of it is behavioral. I think some people might notice that they are not, when confronted by like these extreme and intense emotions, not reacting reflexively and impulsively like they used to, and being able to build in this pause where they're like, okay, how do I access my wise mind? That's a big term in
That's like the
DBT.
same thing we do with our clients who don't
Isn't
have
it so
personality.
cool? Yeah, it's like, when we're in emotion mind, we are just like hit in the face with this wave of it's like, it's so hard to access a skill or a tool that feels like congruent with our values and how we want to show up in the world. So
Mhm.
an indicator I think that someone is like DBT is effective is, like I love hearing people be like, okay, so I was in this crisis, but I was able to use a distress tolerance skill, and I was able to like, essentially do the survival float, without making the situation worse.
Uh-huh.
Because I think often people who are in these, high conflict relationships or encountering crises, it's so easy to just like engage in emotion dependent behavior, like,
Mhm.
acting on angry urges to lash out or withdraw, or, any of these even trauma responses. But I think DBT, um, imparts these skills for like being able to access alternative ways of responding.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Tell us about CBT. How is CBT different?
Okay, so DBT has a lot of CBT like in it. There is like a cognitive structuring restructuring component. So cognitive behavioral therapy focuses on the interconnectedness of our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Kind of the core hypothesis being that emotion isn't caused by the event itself, but our interpretation of the event. um, which that idea dates all the way back to ancient, the ancient Greek Stoics, and even further back to Buddha. Like it's not this new concept,
Mhm.
but CBT kind of posits that if we can change the way we think, we can
Mhm.
change the way we feel and behave, and then there's bidirectionality in that too. And we look at some of these more extreme and distorted patterns of thinking we have. And once we're able to bring those into the light of day, that kind of paves the way for being able to like more readily recognize when we're in these habitual ways of thinking, and then start to challenge these distortions and come up with more constructive and unbiased and helpful ways of thinking, and then
Like
mood usually
everybody could
improves.
use this.
Absolutely. I mean, I love CBT. I think that it has such broad, applications for everyone.
Yeah, I was going to say, thinking about those two modalities, how do you think those could specifically help people in our community situation?
Yeah.
So you're dealing with a high conflict divorce. There's
Yeah.
somebody who's got a personality disorder and or an active addiction. What could, let's say, if I'm dealing with an ex like that, especially in the court system, is there anything I could do or anything that I should know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it has a lot of powerful applications for people who are in high conflict relationships or divorces. I think especially because in those situations, there might have been a lot of cycles of invalidation and there's so much emotional reactivity and you could be so triggered all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the DBT skills, for example, their interpersonal effectiveness skills, it provides this really beautiful language for effective and assertive communication. Like, for example, how to say no to something without guilt, or how
Mm.
to assert a need or a want without aggression. And DBT loves acronyms. Like, there are all these acronyms that show up in the interpersonal effectiveness module, but they are really helpful for these high conflict situations where, we're so tempted to just respond and
Mm-hmm.
react reflexively. And if we can use these tools, it really like lowers defensiveness in the other person and
Mm-hmm.
lowers overall emotional reactivity in them. Just to give you a sense, there's something called the dear man. There are fast skills, give skills. They're funny
I'm like
names, but
trying to read stuff down. Dear
they're
man,
dear
fast skill.
man. And
What's
I've
dear man?
so it's a really wonderful way to ask for something or assert a need in a way that's going to like not be overly emotional and in a way that's going to be really effective. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, the D is just describe. You're
Mm-hmm.
describing to someone just with the facts. You're not making interpretations or judgments. You're just, maybe you're saying the describe might be like, I noticed when you came to pick up the kids that you were 10 minutes late.
Mm-hmm.
Just the facts, not taking out any like you did this or finger pointing. The
And
E,
no one's feelings, just this happened.
right. The D is like just the straight describe. The
Mm-hmm.
E is where you get to express. So you're
Okay.
going to express like how that made you feel. Like when that happened, I noticed feeling pretty anxious because I had to get to the office.
Okay.
Right. So you're describing, you're saying you're using I statements to say like how that made you feel. And then the A is where you come in with the ask or the assert. So it
Mm-hmm.
might be like, hey, next time, would it be okay if you, called me from the car and gave me a heads up? And the R, and I love the R, it's like, it's the reinforce. What's in it for the other person, right? Because it's like kind of this negotiation and it might look something like, that way, I think it'll help the kids feel so much more regulated and it'll make the handoff just easier for both of us.
Mm-hmm.
And the man part, it's really stylistically how you're doing it.
Okay.
Mindfully, and mindfully, like non-aggressive, the A, and the N is you may need to negotiate a little bit. There might be some give and take. But I find that people, once they learn this and they're able to plug it into these situations that are, that involve like a lot of emotional arousal,
Mm-hmm.
just lowers the temperature and it really it makes it more likely that the other person will respond favorably to your request or whatever you're asking for or asserting.
Marissa, I love this because I don't know if I told you this, but we teach our clients something called strategic communication more than anything. And it's
Ah,
not exactly the same, but the goal is the same. You said lower the temperature. We talk about lowering the volume and lowering the
yes.
conflict. And especially, Chris and I belong to something called the Amicable Divorce Network, which is
Mm,
child-centered divorce and separation. But the goal is to reduce the level of conflict. And
yes.
I think there's so much anger and aggression going on in these
Oh, yeah.
situations where people who are involved, not just the
Hmm.
couple, can turn into what's called negative advocates, where they'll be like, well, you
Hmm.
deserve this and this isn't right, and they end up making the conflict worse, which not only
Yes,
is more expensive, but it really harms the family, especially children. And so it's
absolutely.
so important to lower the volume and the temperature in
Yes.
communication. And I feel like people are using AI and it's not really the best way to deal with it,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
to me, part of this whole thing is learning the skills. For us, we
Hmm.
say dealing with the issues and dealing with the bully and learning how to communicate
Yes.
effectively instead of putting this wall up and letting a robot speak for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. AI, it's so helpful in so many ways, but there are definitely pitfalls.
Yeah.
But I love that you guys, teach those skills, and it sounds so similar.
Yeah.
um, there are also some CBT skills, specifically from Team CBT, created by David Burns, where he has what he calls the 5 secrets of effective communication.
Ooh, let's hear it.
Awesome. Love these. Hard to, kind of feels clunky at first, but what you're ultimately doing is you're learning how to disarm the other person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That is what we always say our goal is. We want to disarm them and make them feel
Yeah.
more comfortable to
Yes,
stay
to
out of court.
things, absolutely. Things like thought empathy, feeling empathy, stroking, gentle inquiry, using I statements, I feel statements. Really, and it feels so counterintuitive for people. They're
Uh-huh.
like, why am I agreeing with this person? This person is
I
trying to ruin my life. But, and if it's in the service of really meeting a long-term goal and staying regulated, it could go a really long way.
totally agree. So we talk about this, what you've just described as
Oh,
universal agreements. It's
yeah,
like, what do we both agree on? And then that becomes an anchor for we both want the same thing, like
right.
something general, like we both care about our kids doing well academically. So we might
Yes.
not agree on how that's going to happen, but we both have to solve the problem together rather than I disagree with you. It's like we both want this. Let's keep talking about how it might happen and brainstorm together, even though we hate each other.
I love that collaborative approach. Like
Right.
what is the thing that we can both agree on? Yeah,
Right. Yeah. Coming up with like a solution rather than just bickering about stuff that doesn't even matter now.
absolutely. And I think, validation skills go a long way here too. Like
Yeah.
being able to identify and affirm like the kernel of truth in the other
Uh-huh.
person's like thought, feeling, or behavior really lowers that emotional reactivity and defensiveness in them.
Yeah, and as you're describing this, I heard you say the word negotiation a couple of times. That's a
Yeah.
big thing we do as a lot as well. We teach our clients to do something called taking strategic oversight of their cases, like managing their
Mm,
cases. And we say there's so much you can do in terms of negotiating, not before even formal mediation, but through communication and writing outside of
yes.
court, where you're going back and forth and you're
Mhm.
again focusing on a solution where it doesn't always have to be this huge battle. But
I love
negotiation
that.
skills, that's like we negotiate all the time in our lives.
Right. It's so true. It's such a core life skill. And it's
Yeah.
something that is not always like we're not taught these things in
Right.
school. So it's such an awesome skill set to have, and to practice, and be able to use in these like high conflict, highly arousing situations.
Right. And it also is so empowering because as
Yes.
you learn to effectively negotiate and not be as scared, it's like, oh my gosh, this is working. Like we have so many
Yes.
clients do really well where they're like, I don't want to do it, but I could see why you're having me try. And then they do it and they're like,
Yes.
oh my God, I can't believe it worked. And they totally lapped it up. And instead
How
of like
cool is
going back
that?
to court, it's like they're writing thank you notes to me about my attitude changing. And our client's the one who, changed their behavior and it did disarm the other person.
Love that.
And
How
everybody's happy.
how affirming and reinforcing when that happens. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
had people come back and be like, "Oh my God, the dear man worked,"
I know.
and
I love that name.
whether that's a parent negotiating with a teen, or couples, it's just builds that sense of self-efficacy and mastery, like you're saying, like, wow, that worked. I did that.
Right, right. And that's not just for us as, let's say, parents, but to teach our children how to advocate for themselves as
Yeah,
well. Teach our children the art of negotiation.
absolutely. Such an amazing skill set for life.
Yeah. Well, I see why now everyone's like, for high conflict families, when they're looking for a family therapist, that it's really important to find someone who's trained in DBT and CBT because it makes perfect sense with
Hmm.
the issues and the skills that could really help a family. Is what you do part of what's considered family systems therapy, or is that something different?
It's different. So I do have some training in IFS.
Hmm.
You were saying internal family systems, or
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
internal family systems. I
yeah.
don't know the difference between internal and just family systems.
So family systems is a different approach, and I do have family sessions like
Mhm.
when on an as need basis, and I do parent coaching. but not my main area of focus.
Mhm.
Um, I often with, let's say high conflict, interpersonal conflict between a teen and a parent, I will
Mhm.
hold sessions, what we call like middle path sessions. DBT is big in, again, those dialectics. How do we walk the middle path instead of being so polarized where one person's
Mhm.
digging their heels in all the way over here and the other person's like the other end of the Grand Canyon? How do we move away from that polarity and more towards synthesis?
Oh my God, I love this. I'm so glad you came on today. Um, are there any like little tiny nuggets of practical advice that you could give before we finish up for families in this situation who are our clients in particular feeling really hopeless?
Yeah, I think there are tools and skills out there. I think it's so easy to fall into that kind of feeling of hopelessness, especially when you're like in the weeds. But I
Mhm.
think that there are so many incredible, robust treatment approaches out there, whether for individual or for family, that can go such a long way in helping you feel empowered and more resilient. Um, you know, even under these dire circumstances.
Yeah,
And
I'm
I think
thinking these are things that you can learn.
right, and that's one of the core assumptions of DBT is that, one of them is people are doing the best they can with what they have, and
Mhm.
that people are capable of learning
Mhm.
new ways of responding, which I think is such a hopeful approach. Um, And I think, I'm a huge believer in neuroplasticity. Like we can carve new neural pathways and new ways of responding and feeling and reacting.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I feel better. I'm thrilled to be able to share this information with our clients and our community. But can you tell us how people can find you, and are you geographically limited?
So I do virtual sessions. I'm located in Greenwich, Connecticut. That's where the Cognitive and Behavioral Care Center.
Mhm.
And I'm not necessarily limited geographically because I do virtual sessions as well.
All right, great. And do you deal with families where a child has been turned against another parent and that parent is trying to repair? Okay,
Yeah.
that's like our huge, more than anything,
I'm
unfortunately.
sure. I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it could be so dysregulating for a child.
Yeah. Well, I love the term you used about walking the middle path because these
Mhm.
situations can be so polarizing. So I always love meeting professionals who can try to teach more flexibility and curiosity and open-mindedness and especially give our community hope that it doesn't have to stay this way forever.
Yeah. Big proponent of hope.
Yes.
So
All right. Well, thank you so much, Marissa. Can
thank
you
you,
say how
Lisa.
people can find you specifically?
So you can go on to the website, the Cognitive and Behavioral Care Center website. Um, it's cbcarecenter.com, I believe. And then if they want, they can submit an inquiry on that website.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you so much. And
Thank
I
you,
hope to catch
Lisa.
up with you again in person one of these months.
Same. Thanks so much.
All right.
Take
Take care.
care.
Bye.
Bye.